Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the South Carolina Department of Consumer Affairs webinar on state and federal laws protecting the personal information of South Carolina residents. I am Carrie Gruby-Liebarker. I'm the administrator and consumer advocate for the department, and I'm happy to be here today to discuss these laws with you. All right, so let's go ahead and dive into our presentation. We're going to talk about what identity theft is in general, and then we'll look at some state laws and some federal laws in this area. So identity theft is the unlawful use of personal information of someone else to pose as that person in order to get certain products, goods, and services, right? So it can be a credit card account, it could be a loan, it could be to get health insurance, to file somebody's taxes, or they want to conceal their own true identity from authorities or others who perform criminal background checks. So someone may write bad checks in your name, something like that. There is a difference between a security breach victim and an identity theft victim, and it's important to recognize that because the roadmap for resolving identity theft is different than the one for avoiding it, right? So just because you've gotten a notice saying that your information has been stolen, it doesn't necessarily mean that somebody's used it yet. So you're not necessarily an identity theft victim yet. But so somebody has to use that information for you to fall into that category. And we have seen a lot of security breaches already this fiscal year. Our fiscal year starts in July. So really between July and August, I think it was 35, maybe a little bit more security breach notices that we received, but they affect over 1 million South Carolina residents. So unfortunately, there were some major breaches recently. So what is a security breach? It is the unauthorized access to and acquisition of personal identifying information that was not encrypted or redacted. So oftentimes we hear about businesses having their information hacked, or some malware being put on their computers so that everything they put in to the computer was sent to a fraudster. But we also have it to where, the fraudsters contact you directly in your own home or through an email or through text, and you unfortunately give them information, whether it be your money or your personal identifying information. And it doesn't matter how these scammers try to reach out to you, the number one goal is to separate you from your money or your personal information. So make sure that you are not giving that out, whether you receive a cold call or a cold text or an email. If somebody is initiating that action, you want to make sure that you're not giving them that personal information, that you're doing your own due diligence in the background. If they say they're calling from a government agency or a business, your doctor's office or your bank, that you are calling a number that you know belongs to that particular business prior to giving out that information. So we're going to talk about the laws that require businesses and government to protect your PII, because we certainly know you have to hand over a lot of that to get certain products or services. All right, so first up, we're going to talk about the South Carolina law. So I'm going to go back to this slide. It has a very long name, South Carolina Financial Identity Fraud and Identity Theft Protection Act. We call it FFIPPA for short. Some folks call it FIFI. Which is a little funnier, but it was a comprehensive result of several years of discussion over at our South Carolina State House. There had been probably 8 to 10 years of discussions of bills relating to identity theft. Some touched on security breaches, some touched on records disposal, some touched on the roles of businesses in this area, others on agencies. And so in 2008, we got a comprehensive result that addresses all of those issues. It was S453. The majority of it became effective at the end of 2008, with the security breach portion becoming effective in July 2009. It's been amended a couple times. In 2013, they touched on definitions and the security breach portions of the statute, and then they also added some criminal offenses. And then in 2014, they added a protected consumer freeze, which is the ability to create a credit file for a minor or an incapacitated adult and freeze it so that someone cannot use their information to get credit. And so that became effective January 1 of 2015. So the act provides a lot of protections for consumers, which included security freezes. We were one of the first states to allow a consumer to freeze their credit report without charge. You could freeze it, you could temporarily thaw it out if you wanted to be active in the marketplace, or you could totally lift the freeze for free. Since this time, since 2008, the feds have actually put one in nationwide, because some states had charges of $5 or $10, which when you're having to contact the 3 major credit reporting agencies to place the freezes, that can be costly and a little bit of a deterrent to doing so, and it is a great tool for defending against someone using your personal information to get a product or service where a credit report is required. So kudos to our legislature for putting that in place long before the feds did it for us. And then it also has some provisions on credit reports, on records disposal, security breaches, and more. The Act does not only apply to businesses who do business with South Carolina residents, but also public bodies, state agencies, and it deals with the collection, maintenance, and disposal of a consumer's personal information. So let's talk about the provisions regarding Social Security numbers. So among other prohibitions, a public body or a business is not allowed to make available to the public a person's Social Security number or 6 or more digits of that number. That is going to be the common phrasing throughout this section. You cannot intentionally print or embed a person's Social Security number or 6 or more digits of the number on a card required for access to a product or service. And they cannot require a person to transmit their Social Security number or 6 or more digits of the number over the internet unless there is both a secure connection or unless there is a secure connection or the number is encrypted, not necessarily both. It cannot require a person to use their social or 6 or more digits to access the web unless a PIN is also required. It can't print that information on materials mailed to that person unless state or federal law requires it. And of course, they cannot sell, lease, trade, or intentionally disclose your number to a third party without written consent unless it's for a legitimate business or government purpose, or it's authorized or specifically permitted by law to do so. State agencies do have an additional element that they have to comply with. Whenever we are collecting a person's Social Security number or 6 or more digits of the number, it's to be separated from the rest of the record so that it can be easily redacted pursuant to a FOIA request. And then also, if somebody requests it, we must give a statement of purpose for why we're collecting that Social Security number and how it's going to be used. As with any law, there are exemptions to the Social Security number section. These are just a couple of them. There really are a lot. You can certainly look at the law to see them all. But if a Social Security number is included in an application, that's exempt from the law. It still cannot be on a postcard or visible through an envelope. If somebody's opening an account or making a payment for a product or service that they authorized, it's exempt. If it's used for verification or administrative purposes, if somebody is providing their social or 6 or more digits to a governmental authority or acting pursuant to a court order, warrant, subpoena, or legal process, then the law does not apply. Records disposal. So there are different definitions of personal identifying information. As we discussed earlier, the definition of a security breach is whenever there is unredacted or unencrypted personal identifying information that was released and it was not to somebody who was not supposed to have access to it. But the information we're focusing on is personal identifying information. And there are different definitions depending on the law that you're looking at. So when we're talking about records disposal, the definition that applies here with regards to personal identifying information is when you have the consumer's first name or their first initial plus their last name plus unencrypted or unredacted, and then it gives us a list. And we have some government information like your Social Security number, your driver's license number, financial information such as account numbers, credit card and debit card information, and then a catch-all or other numbers or information that someone can use to get access to financial accounts. And so a business or a public body that is disposing of a record that contains that personal identifying information of an individual, they're supposed to modify it before getting rid of it. And they can modify it by shredding it, erasing it, or by other means. In federal law, they have something dealing with credit reports and disposing of credit reports, and it says to pulverize it. I think that's my favorite action to do to make sure that that personal identifying information is unreadable or undecipherable. A business is allowed to hire a third party to assist them with complying with this section, but we always recommend that they get a certificate of destruction that it was done in compliance with the records disposal law. All right, security breaches. So FFIPPA has some good information for businesses and public bodies and how they are supposed to report security breaches. And so, nowadays, we often hear from consumers who get security breach notices from third parties who are not who the consumer provided the data to, but it's a vendor that the business uses to provide the service or the product to the consumer. And so sometimes we see some confusion there, but in the law, that third party who does not own the data but maintains the personal identifying information for another business, they only have the responsibility of immediately notifying the owner of the data, the business who took in that data, of the breach. And then it is the responsibility of the owner of that data to notify the affected consumers. And the law lists out certain ways that they can make that notification. It can be in written notice, it can be in writing, it can be an electronic notice, but there are some caveats about how the email was collected and whether or not it can be used. Telephonic notice, which is not something that we recommend here at the department because you don't know that you're actually speaking to the person who was affected by the breach. Or there's a substitute notice option if the cost of providing notice to the affected consumers is more than $250,000, or if more than 500,000 people are affected, or if the agency or the business has insufficient contact information. At that point in time, they can do an email notice, they can do a conspicuous posting of the notice on their website page. You can see kind of how the law is a little bit dated, where it says in commas, if the agency maintains one, everybody maintains one these days, or notification to major statewide media. So this is a chart showing security breach notifications that our office has received since 2013. And if more than 1,000 South Carolina residents are affected by a security breach, then the business needs to, or the agency needs to notify our office as well as credit reporting agencies. And so from January 2012 through December 2022, we have been, we have received over 550 security breach notices that affect over 12 million South Carolina residents. Now, right now we have a little over 5 million South Carolina residents, so obviously folks are getting multiple breach notices. 87 breaches were reported by the retail industry, 66 were from the financial service providers, 47 from healthcare organizations, 36 from education providers, 48 from the hospitality industry, and 13 from governmental entities. And then we had 80 reports from organizations that were outside these 6 main categories, and that's where your other column comes in. The most notices that we have received was in 2021, where we had 110. That was followed by 2018, where we had 55, and then 2017, where we had 51. So that 2021 was certainly significantly above what we had seen previously. And unfortunately, it looks like we're going to be closer to that number this year, a high number. So something we decided to do was to create a specific security breach notices page on our website due to the amount of calls that we would get from consumers who would get the notice, again, a lot of times from the third-party provider who would enter into an agreement with the owner of the data to give the notice to consumers, send out that notice. So folks would call us up and be wary, be a little suspicious about the notice that they received because they would not recognize that third party's name. And oftentimes they're telling you in the first paragraph how some of your personal identifying information has been breached. And then at the end of the letter, they're telling you, but they're going to provide some credit monitoring services. You just need to provide your personal identifying information. So folks are being cautious, and they'll reach out to us to see if that is a legitimate letter, if it happened, and if that number that's being provided for them to, again, provide PII is an accurate number. So under our identity theft and scams section on our website at consumer.sc.gov, you can click on security breach notices, and it'll take you to our security breach notices page that has some general information. It has some links to our ID theft protection or prevention guide, the identity theft page, a security breach homepage for businesses. We have that warning that, you know, scammers follow the headlines, so just be on guard if you have gotten a breach notice. And then we list out the breaches. We'll tell you the last time that the page was updated, and then we'll have the organization name, and you would click on the organization's name to get to the actual sample letter that they provided to us that was going to go out to affected residents. We let you know the date reported and how many people total were affected. So we hope that can serve as a resource for folks. There are some other protections under state and federal law as well in the area of security breaches and identity theft. So state agencies have to comply with the Family Privacy Protection Act. And essentially it requires us to establish policies and procedures to ensure that personal information that is being collected is needed. And so this is one of those circumstances where the definition of personal information is different than what we have previously discussed. So here we have a very broad definition of personal information. It includes photographs, digitized images. It includes some of the stuff that we talked about previously with government numbers like your social security number or driver's identification number. It also includes your date of birth, bank account numbers, but broadly your name, your home address, your home telephone number, any medical or disability information, education level, financial status, employment history, height, weight, race, physical details. It really covers a very broad brush. And so we have to provide notice to the public whenever you're submitting information that it may be subject to release, but there's a prohibition on commercial solicitations. So we have to take reasonable measures to prevent somebody from submitting a Freedom of Information Act request to us that is asking for this personal information for commercial purposes, because they want to solicit and make money off of folks, and that's why they need the information. So it's a misdemeanor for somebody to knowingly obtain or use personal information for that purpose. We also have the South Carolina Insurance Data Security Act. It became effective in 2019. I believe that we were the first state to implement this statute, thanks to the former head of the Department of Insurance. He was the leader of the State Agency Insurance Association, and he made it a priority to get this law passed. It applies specifically to insurance companies, and it has requirements for those licensees in the area of cybersecurity. So in addition to FFIPPA, what we have, it has some stricter parameters and set some minimum standards for an actual information security program. It requires notification to the Department of Insurance within 72 hours of a breach, requires board oversight of a company's information security program, and more. And there's a little ditty that the Department of Insurance did on that law that can be found on their website. Now, under federal law, under the Fair Credit Reporting Act, credit reporting agencies have to block information that is related to identity theft, right? So if you've been a victim of identity theft, that information should not be showing up on your credit report. So we have a little checklist on how folks who are victims of identity theft can do this. You're supposed to write each credit reporting agency, include proof of your identity, explain which information on the report resulted from identity theft, and specifically ask them to block that information. The credit reporting agency has a responsibility to send that information to whoever is providing it, the business, the furnisher of the information, but we always recommend you can go ahead and copy the letter and CC the business on it so they can get a jump start. You will need an identity theft report in order to block information from your credit report, and that includes a identity theft affidavit, which the Federal Trade Commission has on their website. We can also send you a copy if you need one, plus a police report. And it can be an information report only. And those two items combined make the identity theft report, and you would send a copy of that with your letter asking the credit reporting agency to block it. So we also have different rules under the Fair Credit Reporting Act and the Graham-Leach-Bliley Act that apply to financial institutions and how they have to have parameters in place to identify identity theft, which is this red flags rule, to where there must be a written program that identifies and detects relevant warning signs of identity theft. And we have a little asterisk next to financial institutions and creditors because it's a very broad definition of a financial institution. So it includes tax preparers and credit counselors and car dealers and mortgage brokers and banks, credit unions, the general folks that you think of as financial institutions as well. So under the Graham-Leach-Bliley Act, we have the safeguards rule, which requires financial institutions to develop and implement safeguards to protect customer information. So this law had been in effect, for nearly, I think, 20 years or so before it went through some revisions that went into effect in 2023. And it provides more of a structure for financial institutions, more specific requirements on what their programs internally need to look like in order to protect consumers' information. So it requires them to regularly monitor, test, and update their information security programs, but they must implement encryption for all customer information in transit and at rest. And there are some exceptions whenever, depending on the size of the financial institution, there are some parameters that don't apply. They must implement multi-factor authentication for any individual accessing an information system. They need to have a written incident response plan, and then they need to have steps to select and retain service providers who are capable of maintaining appropriate safeguards for customer information. So they essentially have to do their due diligence before they hire a third party who is going to maintain some of that personal information for them. And then we have the financial privacy rule, also under the Graham-Leach-Bliley Act, that protects the consumer's non-public personal information. So here we have a new definition of personal information here. And so that means any personally identifiable financial information that a financial institution collects about an individual in connection with providing a financial product or service, unless that information is otherwise publicly available. So they essentially have to let you know if they do share information, who they're sharing it with, and then give you the opportunity to opt out of that sharing. Okay, so as I mentioned previously, our office has an identity theft unit that takes scam reports and identity theft reports. And you can contact us toll-free in South Carolina at 800-922-1594 or go to consumer.sc.gov. And on our website, you can download and complete an identity theft intake form. And so if you go to the How Do I and click Report Identity Theft, it'll take you, or you can go to the Identity Theft and Scams page, and it'll take you to our Identity Theft intake form, where we collect some information from you to help us best assist you with the steps, the individualized steps that you need to take to mitigate that. We're actually working on some online forms to try and make it a little easier for you to submit that too, so look forward to having those in place. And then on that Identity Theft Resources page, you can also click under How to Report to get the information. And it has different checklists there. So if you had somebody file your taxes before you could and steal your tax refund, you could click on income tax fraud, and this little checklist would come up and tell you specifically, the contacts that you need to make and what you need to do to try and mitigate that situation. We also have a baseline toolkit that you'll be able to access there as well that gives you generalized information that applies to anybody who's a victim of identity theft and tools and resources that you have there. You could also go down to was your information lost or stolen if you received a security breach notice, or if you lost your wallet or credit card or anything of that nature. And there we have several resources, including avoiding identity theft in the age of information compromise. And it tells you some tools that you have to try and prevent your information from being used, or at least getting notified if it is, so that you can remedy it quickly, and different red flags that you may be a victim of ID theft. And then we have the How to Prevent Identity Theft Guide, which is a comprehensive guide that talks about what to do after you receive a security breach notice, what the difference is between a fraud alert and a freeze, identity theft protection services, some security freeze FAQs. We kind of get rid of some myths in that section, how you can take advantage of the protected consumer security freeze, different habits that you can do to try and protect yourself from identity theft, and then if you are a victim, what you can do. So all this information can be downloaded on our website that we've talked about, but we also have some publications that we have in hard copy that we can send out to you. And that includes Ditch the Pitch, our guide for guarding against scams, our brochure on credit reports, what they are and why they matter. The How to Prevent Identity Theft is a hard copy that we can send out to you. We have auto guides for consumers and dealers, and then Recovering from a Disaster, which thankfully we have not had to hand those out as frequently as we had been with all the floods that we experienced in the years past. You can also connect with us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. We have lots of videos. I mentioned we do these Wednesday webinars every Wednesday, just about, unless it's a holiday or some unforeseen circumstance pops up. And so we have some great playlists on different topics, including homeowners associations, credit, more on identity theft and scams, and things like that. So I encourage you to take a look.